Theophilus, A Tale of Ancient Rome. Travel back in time with me and Lewis. Coming up next, right here on The Right Stuff. You are listening to the best, the only place to be on Tuesday night. That's right, you're listening to The Right Stuff, and you're at the right place at the right time. From England to Canada, from Detroit to the Poconos, we are showcasing Christian authors worldwide, giving you tips, tools, techniques, and resources for you, the writer, to hone and perfect your craft. Tune in every Tuesday at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, right here on WPJC 104.5. And your host, Parker J. Cole. Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Right Stuff. I am so glad you are here with me. We're going to be talking to my returning guest co-host and contributor today, Lewis Ben Smith. He is the author of fascinating adventure, historical fiction novels, and let me tell you, you are going to love his latest addition to the genre. So this is what I want you to do. Go get your friends, your family, tune in to the show. You can listen in by calling on the call-in number. Click on this link that you're seeing on your social media, on your Twitter, wherever it is, and definitely tune into the show tonight. You can call in at 646-668-8485 and then press 1 to be live on air, or hit me on Twitter at Parker J. Cole, hashtag Right Stuff, with your questions and comments. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We will be right back. Don't go anywhere. More with Parker and her guests on the Right Stuff radio show. We'll be right back.
If you are an author looking to gain visibility for your books, then AuthorShout.com is the place to go. We have a wide variety of affordable products and services to include a member zone that will help you get the word out about your books. Our team here at AuthorShout.com specializes in creating stunning digital products to include book banners, teaser videos, book trailers, book covers, and a whole lot more. So what are you waiting for? Stop by AuthorShout.com today and let our team connect you with a world of new readers.
Question: if you write a book, everybody will rush out to buy it. Obvious answer: no. If you were a celebrity or if you had a huge marketing budget, then maybe you can get a lot of exposure for your book. Another solution would be to check out JoeyTweets.com. JoeyTweets.com is a promotion and marketing service with access to over 1/3 followers on Twitter. JoeyTweets.com has 3 packages available to fit any budget. That's JoeyTweets.com. JoeyTweets.com. Get some serious exposure for your books.
We're back, and you're hanging out with the queen of Tuesday night, Parker J. and her guests, right here on The Right Stuff. Hi, and welcome to the show. You're listening to The Right Stuff here on WPJC 104.5. Again, I am so glad you're able to join me for this edition of the show. You know, I always have a phenomenal time with my guest co-host today, Lewis Ben Smith. We are both fellow Elexio authors. We enjoy what we do. We enjoy our publisher. But most of all, we love writing our stories. We love connecting you with whether it's romance or history. We want to connect you. And me and Lewis do share that similar bond there. And, you know, Lewis, thank you again for being with us on the show today.
Hey, Parker, how are you this evening?
I am fine. You know, I was looking forward to our show because we had talked about it, you know, about a month or so ago. We talked about you being on the show. And so now it's here. It's like, wow, where do we start? So the best place to start right now is just tell us a little bit of who you are in your own words for those of us who are new listeners.
All right. Well, I am a pastor, school teacher, writer, artifact collector, and goat rancher, plus a few other hats, husband, father, etc. I live in Northeast Texas in the town of Greenville, and I've been a published writer now. Published my first novel in 2014, and my 5th installment is about to come out next spring. So I've been, once I started writing, I had a hard time stopping.
I know exactly what you mean, Lewis. Once you start, you just can't stop. Like that Pringles, that Pringles commercial.
Absolutely.
Once you stop, you just can't stop. That's exactly what it is. And like I said, we both love what we do. We love connecting with our readers and our friends there. It's been a minute since you've been on the show, though. So what have you been doing since your last release? Go ahead, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Theophilus came out last spring, and so I did a pretty healthy round of book signings this summer and fall. Got the word out. I've gotten some very nice reviews from folks on Amazon and Goodreads. Overall, the book's been very well received. I'm very proud of Theophilus. I think it is probably the best thing I've turned out yet, and I'm anxious for more people to pick this up and read it. It features a part of history that I'm really fascinated by and always have been.
You say history, and a lot of times people hear history. The first thing they think is they're going to be in Lanesville. Oh my gosh, history is so boring. But I have found history to be quite fascinating. Maybe not all aspects of history. Like I don't want to know about the history of taxes. I don't want to know. But then someone else could, that could be right up their alley. Because they want to tell the government I don't have to pay taxes. So they may be completely, into that type of thing. But history in and of itself is a beautiful thing to study, because you start to find out that people really are the same throughout time. It's I think it was Bertrand Russell who said, history is just old things happening to new people. I think that's what he said. Something like that.
Is true. I mean, human nature is the great constant. Technology changes, politics change, but human nature remains the same.
Yes. And I think that's important, because we need to understand that in order to make the best decisions in the present, so our future can be a little bit more stable. But I know right now there's a lot of flux going on, political flux, identity flux, all kind of fluxes going on. And there's no one reaching out to look back in the past, see, well, what happened back in the day? What did people do in the past? And so you have this book, Theophilus, A Tale of Ancient Rome, and we're talking about a period of history that a lot of people don't understand. Before we get into that, why is it so important to understand ancient history like in ancient Rome and other parts of the world?
Well, for one thing, that is truly our cultural roots. Until relatively recently, the classics, reading Caesar's Gallic Wars, reading Cicero's speeches, in the original Latin, that was a part of the high school curriculum. It's kind of a sad commentary on America that in the last century, we've gone from teaching Greek and Latin in high school to teaching remedial English in college. But as far as the foundations of our culture, all roads lead to Rome. Rome, Athens, and Jerusalem, those are the three touchstones on which Western civilization is built. And particularly the era that I focus in, the 1st century A.D., the beginnings of the Roman Empire, that is also the birthplace of Christianity. That is the moment that God chose to connect with this world and physically step into human history in a human form. So for the believer, it's tremendously important. And even for the person who's not a believer, to see how Christianity got started and the very real historical background that lays behind it.
It's fascinating that you said, if you want to know about our Western culture, you got to go back to Rome. And just some of the things that are flittering through my mind as I hear that, I think about how Rome was, the machine of Rome when it was at its peak was just this relentless machine that dominated the known world at the time. And we still have remnants of that today. This is why it's so important to understand that. And so as you deal in the 1st century, a lot of people think, do I really need to know what happened in the 1st century that's going to affect me in the 21st century? What do you say to that?
Well, if you're a Christian, it affects you very strongly. And even if not, look at our calendar. We divide history in two, the year that Christ was born. Look at our government today. Do you understand that our founders, when they created America, they looked at the Roman Republic. They looked at its strengths, and they also looked at what caused it to fall. And our Constitution is essentially, so many of those things there are based on Rome. They had a Senate. We have a Senate. They had a popular assembly. We have a House of Representatives. In their culture, the tribunes of the plebs have veto power. In our culture, the president has veto power. There are just so many neat things that are really derivative from Rome that are still with us today in our architecture. I mean, a first-century Roman walking into Washington, D.C. would be very at home with most of the public buildings because they are a Greco-Roman style of architecture.
You know, interesting that you say that, too, because you say, you know, so much of our Western civilization comes from Rome. I'll let you know how huge of an impact it lasts. Because like you said, people pretty much are the same. But like you said, technology changes, you know, politics change, but people rarely change. And it's interesting because sometimes you'll hear something. Well, I should say this, and I know I'm not that old, Louis, so just bear with me for a second, okay? But I was listening to one of the kids and just talking, and I was like, wow. I remember saying that when I was a kid, and I was stupid then, you know, but I didn't say it to her, you know, but I was thinking to myself, you know, wow, you really do start to hear the same things over and over again, which is why I think it's important for us to go back and look in the filter of history and talk about it. Now, go ahead and peel back the veil, because I want to get into the Theophilus, but I want you to peel back the veil first. I am in first century Rome. What does a day in first century Rome look like?
Well, in the city of Rome, of course, you had vast marketplaces. You had these high-rise apartments called insula, which could be up to, 5, 6, 7 stories tall, full of people. It was extremely crowded. One thing most people don't realize is that Rome in the first century had a population of 1 million. So it would be noisy. It would be smelly. When you walk down into the Great Forum, which is where the Senate met, there were several temples and public buildings. The Senate was liable to meet in any of those. And then in what they called the Well of the Comitia, the popular assemblies would meet. The Senate represented the wealthy and the upper classes, whereas the popular assemblies represented the commoners of Rome. And so any bill that was passed in the Senate would be ratified by the popular assemblies. Originally, in the days of the Republic, Rome had an elected leader called a consul. What's interesting, there were 2 consuls, and they served a 1-year term. And then once that 1-year term was up, they would step down, someone else would step up. And really, Rome functioned as a republic. How long Roman civilization lasted. The city of Rome was founded in 753 B.C. And Rome at first, for about 400 years, was a kingdom. And the king had a council of advisors that were known as the Senate. And then in around 350 years before Christ, the Senate rose up. They toppled the last king of Rome, and they created a republic. And the republic would endure for about 4 centuries. Now, it wasn't a pure democracy, but it was a government that gave the people a voice. You had the patricians, which were the very wealthy, aristocratic, blue-blooded Romans. You had the patricians and the plebeians, that was everybody else. And the thing about the plebs, in time, some of them became so wealthy, they lived like patricians. And so the existence of the consuls, that was a compromise. The Romans had one consul who was a patrician and another one who was a pleb. That way, both sides of the population will be represented. In this little city-state, first it conquered most of the Italian peninsula. Then it took on the empire of Carthage and suddenly found itself in possession of Greece, Sicily, Spain, southern Gaul, which was, Italy, Switzerland, France, up near the Alps. They just began to spread outwards. And by the first century, of course, there was a massive civil wars in the first century B.C. First uprising around 150 B.C., then the wars between Marius and Sulla, and then finally the contest between Caesar, Julius Caesar, and the Senate, which resulted in the creation of the death of the Republic and the creation of the empire. The first true emperor of Rome was Caesar Augustus. You run into him in the book of Luke, where it says there went out a decree in those days from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. We read his name every year in the Christmas story, and our month of August is actually named for him.
Okay. Go
ahead.
Yeah. Well, so what I'm thinking as I'm listening to you, we have these connections of Rome that we feel to the 21st century. And then as you peel back the veil about how Rome looked in the first century, you're letting us know that this civilization was out for a while. And then they got rid of the king and they got a republic, not a full democracy, but they had a republic and they had a senate. They had people represented, and everyone had like a, they each had a voice. You know what I mean? They each had a voice. And so I like how, as you explain this, and then you show the biblical connection with that. And I think that's important because a lot of people say, well, the Bible is just a book of fairy tales. And you're saying, no, it actually is a historical narrative of times gone by. Go ahead and correct me if I'm saying that wrong, or expand on that thought.
No, you sound absolutely right. The Bible is, the events of the New Testament are closely rooted in the history of the Roman Empire. Luke and Acts together list about 40 different officials. One thing that's interesting, Luke, in every case, he puts the right person with the right title at the right time in the right place. And so, anyway, just to kind of continue where I left off. So Jesus is born, probably around 2 B.C., actually. We think the guy who created the Christian calendar was probably off by at least a couple of years. And Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, died around 14 B.C. So Jesus would have been a teenager when Augustus died. He was replaced by Tiberius. Tiberius was the emperor at the time that Jesus had his public ministry, also during the crucifixion, the trial. All of those events happened while Augustus was emperor, and it would have been Augustus that appointed Pontius Pilate as the prefect of Judea, the governor of the province where Jesus lived. And again, these are real historical people. I've seen the inscription with Pontius Pilate's name on it that they found there in Caesarea, which is the only surviving inscription from his time as governor that's still in existence. And so, that kind of just pushes the narrative forward. While all this was going on in Rome, with Tiberius as emperor and a lot of battles with the Senate. Now, one thing the emperors did, they were very smart. Augustus started this. He let Rome continue to look like a republic. They still had elections. They still had consuls and tribunes of the plebs and all the other elected offices. But the emperor, or the princeps, as they called him, the first citizen, he kind of had veto power over the elections. He got to pick the candidates he wanted. And as a result, the emperor was, he was running everything, but the people still looked like the power was theirs. They felt they had the illusion of self-government, even though they were down in the So Tiberius died around 37 A.D. That was about 4 years after the crucifixion and Pentecost. Around the time that the Apostle Paul was converted was when Tiberius died. He was replaced by a truly insane young man by the name of Caligula. And those who read my second book, The Redemption of Pontius Pilate, got to read a little bit about Caligula. He was a seriously bent twig. The dude was messed up. But he didn't rule for very long. 3 years in, he was stabbed to death by 2 of his own generals. He had embarrassed the army and humiliated the Senate, and Caligula didn't last very long at all. And he was succeeded by a wise, scholarly emperor named Claudius. And Claudius becomes one of the main characters in my story of Theophilus.
The thing about power, I think it is illusionary. I think control in life is truly illusionary. And, what was so interesting about Rome is that in the book of Daniel, Daniel has prophecy relating to Rome, has prophecy relating to all the world powers that came to be. Do you think the significance of Rome is because of the lasting impression that will happen from Rome? I know you're just coming from the 20th century, looking backwards, with the impact of Rome. You think when the Lord obviously knows what he's doing, but when the Lord let us know that, here we are in the 21st century, 2,000 years later, and Rome still has this impact on us. Is that just, how do you view that? I find it quite fascinating, you know what I'm saying? But how do you view that?
Well, Paul talked about when the fullness of time had come, God sent his son. And I think Rome was really the fulfillment of that statement, because if you look at it, the Roman Empire controlled almost a quarter of the world's population. And, this world has always been fragmented and disorganized throughout its history. You've had rival kingdoms, rival governments, and suddenly, right around the time Augustus becomes emperor, suddenly you have this vast territory. I mean, at its height, the Roman Empire stretched from London to Libya, all the way around the Mediterranean realm, connecting 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa together under one government, one language, one network of roads. And suddenly it was possible to reach a larger percentage of the human population with the gospel than had ever been possible before, or would be, though God sent his Son into the world at the exact right moment for that message to reach the greatest possible number of people in the shortest amount of time. And if you look, the so-called Pax Romana, which really started with Augustus, would last for 2.5 centuries. And that would let the gospel spread all through North Africa, from Asia slowly eastward, from southern Europe slowly northward, until Christianity came to be the dominant religion in that whole area of the world. And then from there, in God's good time, it would spread outward through missionaries, through discovery, through all these other things. And none of that would have been possible had it not been for the Empire of Rome coming when it did and how it did to unify such a great portion of the world.
That sends chills down my spine, Louis. That was something I did not know, which is why I love talking with you every single time. I always learn something new. And that's the whole thing about history. And I think that's probably why one of your fascinations with history is just you see the dots. You looking from now to back then, they didn't see the dots, so we see the dots. I think that's a fascinating aspect of studying history. And for those of you listening in, we're talking to Louis Ben Smith and his newest release, Theophilus, A Tale of Ancient Rome. If you want to call in, please do. Call in at 646-668-8485, and then press that 1 to be live on air. Or hit me on Twitter at ParkerJCo, #RightStuff with your questions and comments. We'll be back after these messages. Don't go anywhere. More with Parker and her guests on the Right Stuff Radio Show. We'll be right back.
Are you a reader looking for more compelling Christian fiction? Maybe something a little more edgy or a bit more real? Are you tired of most Christian fiction shying away from the truth and settling for a rose-tinted view of the world and its issues? Or are you an author who has a compelling story to tell, but you're afraid it doesn't jive with today's brand of Christian or secular fiction? Are you tired of Christian publishers telling you that your content is too edgy? Or maybe you've tried submitting your content under the radar to secular publishers only to be told your themes are a bit too religious? We invite you to take a look at the Crossover Alliance. We are an online publishing company that specializes in edgy Christian speculative fiction with Christian themes and real-world content. Our company is formed from authors and readers just like you who are breaking into the mainstream and Christian markets with this compelling genre. Head over to the www.thecrossoveralliance.com for all the details on who we are, what we do, and what we accept. Right now, if you sign up for our email newsletter, you'll receive a free digital copy of our first short story anthology. Check us out today and help us spread the word about the Crossover Alliance, where light shines brighter in the darkness.
The Speculative Fiction Cantina is your weekly hypodermic injection of science fiction, fantasy, horror, alternate history, and things weird and wonderful in the world of books and writers. You'll hear from writers who bend the rules and drive the narrative. We ask authors the hard questions. We do the show in our pajamas. Join S. Evan Townsend on this journey over the rainbow and through the looking glass. The Speculative Fiction Cantina on Rightstream Radio every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern.
God gives humans the gift of making amazing stories to glorify Him. At speculativefaith.com, our ministry is to help fans explore fantasy, science fiction, supernatural stories, and beyond from an intentional and biblical Christian perspective. We share daily articles and have extensive archives tackling hot topics like end times beliefs, the art of writing, creative excellence in the Christian subcultures, discernment, sex, magic, Harry Potter, and space aliens and the Bible. If you are a parent or anyone else with a discriminating palate, our reviewers explore fantastical novels, movies, television, and games in light of God's beauty, goodness, and truth. Want to find Christian stories? The Spec Faith Library lists every fantastical novel we can find from a Christian author. It's all part of our mission to discern, engage, and enjoy fantastical human creativity in honor of our Creator, Jesus Christ. SpeculativeFaith.com, exploring fantastical stories for God's glory.
We're back, and you're hanging out with the Queen of Tuesday Night, Parker J., and her guests, right here on The Right Stuff. Hi, and welcome back to the show. You're listening to The Right Stuff here on WPJC 104.5. Again, I am so glad you are here with me on the show to talk to my friend Louis Ben Smith and his newest book, Theophilus, A Tale of Ancient Rome. And Louis, once again, thanks for being with me on the show. I can't wait to get into this book. So go ahead and tell us what Theophilus is all about.
All right. Well, you know, one Roman emperor that even most Americans have heard of to this day was Nero. Nero, of course, has kind of become a byword for cruelty and tyranny, and he was a pretty messed up young man. He actually became emperor when he was only 16 years old. He was the adopted son of Claudius Caesar, and most historians agree that Claudius was poisoned either by Nero himself or by Nero's mother, Agrippina, who wanted her son to become the rightful emperor. And so he had the world dumped in his lap at 16, and he ruled for 14 years. He died at the age of 30. And, of course, the old proverb about Nero is that Nero fiddles while Rome burns. That's entirely true. The fiddle wasn't invented yet. But there is a story that while the city of Rome was burning, he played upon the harp and sang a song about the stock of Ilium in the days of Ulysses. Now, Nero said he didn't do that. In fact, he claimed that he did his best to fight the fires. But the fact is, the Great Fire of Rome happened in 64 A.D., and it was a horrific fire. It killed tens of thousands of people. Out of the 7 districts, or the 14 districts of Rome, 3 were completely destroyed and 10 were damaged. Anyway, Nero wanted to deflect blame from himself, and so he blamed this new cult that had just gotten started in Rome that was very unpopular. That was the Christians. And as a matter of fact, Clement of Rome, writing around 95 A.D., tells us that both Peter and Paul were put to death by order of Nero in retaliation for the Great Fire of Rome. So Theophilus opens in that memorable session of the Roman Senate right after the fire, with the city still stinking of smoke and death, as Nero goes before the Senate and issues his decree against the Christians. And he asks if anyone in the Senate of Rome is willing to stand up for these horrible criminals. And one man stands up and volunteers to speak on behalf of the Christian community. That's kind of the prologue to the novel. That's where it starts. And then I played the backstory of this man. I give him the name Marcus Quintus Publius, but he is also the Theophilus who's mentioned in the book of Acts. Now, if you read the New Testament, you will see that both Luke and Acts are dedicated to a man named Theophilus. The problem is we don't know who Theophilus was or why Luke would dedicate 2 books of the Bible to him. You know, there is a mystery there. And so Theophilus in Latin simply means lover of God. And so the thought is that Theophilus was someone in the Senate who was sympathetic to Rome, or to the Christians rather, who was willing to give them a chance. But we don't know, again, who he was. But one of the most interesting theories I've ever read about the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts is that they were written as a defense brief for Paul right before he went to trial before Nero. He was arrested. The book of Acts ends with Paul under arrest in Caesarea, and then going to Rome and being in house arrest and waiting for his trial before Nero. And so people think that whoever Theophilus was, he was a member of the upper crust of Roman society, and that Paul employed him as an advocate, a defense attorney. And so I start with that prologue and then flash back about 10 years to this young Roman senator. He's just been elected quaestor, that was one of the rungs up the ladder of honors that a Roman could achieve in his life. And if you were elected quaestor, that automatically made you a member of the Senate. Now, you were a junior member. You're what they call a pedarian. You could not speak yet unless you were called on, but you had a vote in the Senate. And so this young senator wins the trust and friendship of the Emperor Claudius Caesar. He winds up being sent out on a tour of the provinces, trying to clean up corruption and graft in the provinces which have been neglected under Caligula and Tiberius. And so Marcus Quintus Publius goes out and is touring the provinces. He runs into some corrupt governors, and at one point, one of these governors decides to take him out rather than submit to being arrested and sent back to Rome on corruption charges. And while Publius survives the attack, his young beloved servant, a boy that he was given as a present by his uncle, actually jumps in front of a blade that was intended for him and is stabbed in the stomach. And so, at that point, Publius told of two men who were the apostles of a new God, who had the power to heal. And so he goes looking for these two young men. He's looking for a man named John and a man named Paul. And he travels to Antioch, and that's where he meets them. And sure enough, they manage to heal the servant. And so Publius tells them, if I can ever do you a favor, let me know. And so a few years later, when he's off fighting a war on the Parthian frontier, he gets a letter that Paul has been arrested and sent to Rome. And so it really is, it's two things. It's the story of a Roman aristocrat bumping into this new faith and eventually adopting it as his own. But it's also a story of two emperors, Claudius and Nero. You get to see the power slowly corrupt Nero and drive him over the edge to insanity. You get to see poor old Claudius doing his best to put the end together, only to be poisoned by his own wife. And all of this is going on. It's kind of a juxtaposition of what was happening in Rome and what was happening at the same time in the history of the early church with Peter and Paul and some of the events that are chronicled in the book of Acts.
One thing I find fascinating as I listen to you tell the tale of Theophilus, the tale of ancient Rome, is just how rich in detail the story is. One thing that kind of caught my attention is the fact that you have these two emperors, and they represent two different sides of how far man can go. You kind of have, like you said, the first, Claudius. You said Claudius, he's trying to keep this together. He's trying to work this. And then you got, Psycho Nero. Okay, he's psycho. Really, he's a synonym for that, the psycho crazy Nero, And then it just shows you the limitations of man. And then you have Christianity exploded during this time. That's what makes it extremely interesting for me as we look back on history. Christianity exploded. And one thing I wanted to ask you as you was talking, you said there's this new God. Where did the Roman fascination for gods come from? I know they came from the Greeks when they took over the Greeks. But, there's a God in Rome, but they're so godless. They have gods all over the place. So kind of peel back what's going on in the Roman psyche on a large scale during that time, because you got Christianity flourishing in the midst of all these fake gods.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's interesting. The world was looking for something. You look at the writings of Virgil, who was the poet laureate of the Roman Empire during the time of Augustus, and he talked about the birth of a living God who would bring a new age of peace and prosperity to the world. Now, he thought that would be Augustus himself. He was thinking of Augustus becoming like a man god who would bring peace to the world. But really, even in his pagan ignorance, he was predicting something that was yet to come. Now, as far as the Romans themselves, they had borrowed a fair number of the gods from the ancient Greeks, but they kind of took them and changed them a little humanoid. I mean, if you remember your Greek mythology, Zeus coming down and fathering children on earthly women and their affairs and their quarrels. The Romans did borrow a lot of elements of Greek culture, but most Romans didn't really see the gods as literally and physically as the Greeks did. They thought that the Greek gods that they had adopted, whether it be Jupiter or Minerva or Venus or Vulcan, that they represented elemental forces. And the Romans believed that you could enter binding contracts with your gods, that if you provided them with the temples and the sacrifices that they required, then in turn they would bless and protect. They had little household gods, the Lares, and I forget the other name, it popped out of my head, that every day you would burn incense before your household gods to protect your house and home. You had gods and goddesses for every purpose. Roman women honored a goddess called the Bona Dea. The highest and greatest god was Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Jupiter the best and greatest. But really, many Romans were growing frustrated with the traditional religions, and you see, around the time Christianity was born, you see a growth of different cults. I mean, Christianity wasn't the only new religion that Romans began to adopt in the 1st and 2nd century, but it proved to be the most successful and longest lasting.
So we're in the book of Theophilus, A Tale of Ancient Rome, and we have Marcus Publius. He's on this journey to find Peter, and I think you said Paul and John, or Paul and Peter. I think you said Paul.
Well, he meets all three of them eventually. He first meets Paul and John, and then later on he meets Simon Peter.
Yeah, because I know you said Peter too. I'm like, wait, all three? All three, And I love when you put those characters, those real life figures into the books. I absolutely love when authors do that. I love that, that you're talking to this man of history. I love that, But my question is this. So, Marcus, he's on this journey. He's finding these apostles. What are some of the things that you explore through Marcus that the reader for the 21st century will relate to?
Well, for one thing, just the concept of trying to embrace a belief that is different and new from anything you've accepted before. I mean, he could not deny the power of the Christian God when he saw his servant literally brought back from the very doorway of death before his eyes. And yet, at the same time, to make the decision to follow Jesus, even at a time when it was not yet illegal to do so. Christianity was not yet banned, but it was, it was frightening. You're turning your back on your culture and everything you believed up to that point and embracing a new belief system. But, it helps that he was able to talk to the men that walked with Jesus, and later on that he was able to offer them some service. But in the story, at least, it was Paul who gave him that nickname, Lover of God, Theophilus in Greek, because that was the first question that Paul asked him. He said, do you love God? And Marcus honestly could not give an answer except this: any God that heals children is a God that I could learn to love.
We're talking to Lewis Ben Smith about his new book, Theophilus, A Tale of Ancient Rome. It's available on Amazon.com or wherever books are sold, or you can go directly to AlexiaPublishing.com, go to their website and order from there. You probably get it cheaper from there, too. Wherever you do, go ahead and order a copy of this book today, because you're going to absolutely love how Lewis peels back the veil and enshrines us and encapsulates us into ancient Rome. It has been getting rave reviews, so I definitely want to make sure that when you buy a copy of Lewis's book, that you also leave a review. Please consider leaving a review. We love reviews. It helps us know that what we set out to do, we did. We're going to go ahead and take a quick short break. When we come back, more with Lewis Smith and Theophilus, A Tale of Ancient Rome. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. More with Parker and her guests on the Right Stuff Radio Show. We'll be right back.
Have you read the latest issue of Sormag Digital, the award-winning literary magazine for multicultural readers and writers? Sormag Digital is available quarterly and showcases interviews with the best authors in multicultural literature. Sormag Digital features craft and business articles for those interested in writing. If you're looking for a good book, check out our book reviews on what's hot in multicultural literature. For writers looking for new readers to get in front of, Sormag Digital is the perfect place to introduce your book. We offer advertising spaces that fit your promotional budget. Get your free subscription on Sormag.com or order a print issue on magcloud.com. If you would like more information about Sormag Digital, check us out on Sormag.com or contact us at sormag@yahoo.com. Sormag Digital is the magazine for multicultural readers and writers.
Authors, are you looking for a new way to get your book in the hands of new audience of targeted buyers? Then a virtual book tour is for you. Right now, virtual book tours is an excellent opportunity for you to introduce your book and who you are as an author. Launching your book is very important. A virtual book tour will connect you with readers. We at WNL, we specialize in book tours, book blasts, radio tours, cover reveals, and Facebook chat. Promoting and marketing your book is what we do. Online publicity, the exposure and the publicity is what you need. Let us help you reach new readers and a new audience. We take care of everything so you don't have to. We set up the tour for you. We connect you with bloggers to advertise your book by way of interviews, guest posts, and reviews. If you are an author of a newly published book, have an upcoming release, or just want to give a previously published book new life, a virtual book tour is your answer. Check our tours out at www.wnlbooktours.com. Visit me on Facebook. I am the owner, Paulette Harper.
We're back, and you're hanging out with the queen of Tuesday night, Parker J. and her guests, right here on The Right Stuff. Hi, and welcome back to the show. You're listening to The Right Stuff on WPJC 104.5. I hope you're having just a good time as much as I am, because I have been having wonderful, wonderful conversation with Lewis Smith, the author of Theophilus, A Tale of Ancient Rome. If you like historical fiction, if you like biblical fiction, if the older, the better it is for you, pick up a copy of Lewis's book today, Theophilus, A Tale of Ancient Rome. You know, Lewis, I know you have more books like this, because this is what you do. You do history, and you put your own spin on it. So go ahead, tell us a little bit more about some of the other books that are in your repertoire.
All right. Well, Theophilus is my fourth book in print. My first one was called The Testimonium. It's a biblical archaeology thriller, a tale of faith, archaeology, romance, and terrorism set on the island of Capri in Italy. And I wrote it in 2012. I published it in 2014. And it tells the tale of a group of archaeologists working on some Roman ruins on the island of Capri. They discover the original report that Pontius Pilate filed back to Rome about the crucifixion of Jesus. And so, needless to say, it generates a huge stir when it's found and published. Everything from atheists trying to debunk it to terrorists trying to blow it up. And it was a fun story to write. It was my first, and I think for a first effort, it was pretty good, but I do think I've gotten better since then. That book got me interested. I was already interested in the Roman era. I've been interested in that time period ever since I read Lloyd C. Douglas's book, The Road, when I was in high school. But from there, I wrote The Redemption of Pontius Pilate, where I went back. That was my first true historical novel. I went back in time and tried to put myself in Pontius Pilate's shoes and to tell his story. And just like Theophilus is interwoven with Claudius and Nero, Pilate is interwoven with Augustus and Tiberius and Caligula. And so that was what I wound up doing, really, was writing two different trilogies. I have my Capritian trilogy and I have my Ancient Rome trilogy. The second book in the Capritian trilogy was called Matthew's Autograph. It's my shortest book. It's a fun, fast-moving little story. It reunites my team of archaeologists, this time in Israel, where Father McDonald, the archaeological consultant who works for the Vatican, has uncovered the tomb of St. Matthew. and they find what appears to be an original text, an autograph of Matthew's gospel in his own hand. But it's different from every version of Matthew that we have today. And so it becomes a race against time to see if we've been mistranslating the gospel for 2,000 years, or if perhaps this is some sort of extraordinary forgery. And so there's that. That story, that one was short, it's punchy, it was fun to write, and it's fun to read. And then after that one, I did Theophilus, and I have a new release coming out in April. It's the final volume of the Capri Team trilogy. It's called The Gnostic Library, and it is set in Egypt. Again, Father McDonald is the initial guy who's called in. Eventually, the rest of the team, Joshua and Isabella Parker, and also Dr. Luke Martins, who is Josh's mentor, get called in to look at this extraordinary find of an entire library of Gnostic scrolls that Father McDonald has found buried in a huge sand dune in Egypt. But then things turned south in a hurry when a gang of terrorists that had fled Egypt after the Muslim Brotherhood was overthrown and are operating out of the desert kidnapped Father McDonald and the scientist that he's working with, a female archaeologist, and take them hostage. So really, the Gnostic Library is a powerful story. It's half archaeological thriller and half hostage drama, but it also looks at the question of how do we react when there are people who hate us so much they want to destroy everything we stand for? And what is a Christian response in the modern world to, the kind of extremism that Qaeda and ISIS and groups like that? So that one was completed last year. It will be released in April. I believe either April or May. I have to look at my contract to be sure, but this spring. And then once it has been released, I'll be I'm currently working on the last volume of my Rome trilogy, and it's called The Emperor and the Apostle. And it starts off about 10 years after Theophilus ends, and it is the story of the Apostle John as the last of the living disciples of Jesus near the end of his life, and his dealings with the Emperor Domitian, who was not as well known as Nero, but almost as psychotic. And I'm actually working on that one right now. I've got it pulled up on my computer downstairs. So those are the books that I've written or am writing. And once I'm done with The Emperor and the Apostle, I have no idea which direction I'm going to go next, except I want to try something different.
Like every author, we all do want to do something different. I know for myself, this is it's not top secret or anything, but I am actually working on a military sci-fi story, actually. And mind you, I don't know how to hold a gun. I'll probably shoot myself before I shoot anyone else. But I'm looking forward to that. I've been having lots of men that I know who are hunting right now here in Michigan, a lot of hunters right now. And I'm like, bring me back some steak, and I want some veal and stuff like that. And so I like how even though you're in your niche, there's always room to grow. And I think it kind of connects our whole idea about the history that you love, that you use in your books. Use all this history in your books to educate the reader. So even though they're getting an entertaining tale, there's still history there. Why is it so important, Louis, for us to know the history? I know we talked a little bit earlier, but I think even now, almost crucial, because so many people are making assumptions because they saw it on the internet, they saw it on TV, or they're just regurgitating what someone else said. I remember when I first had you on the show and you talked about the Da Vinci Code and how you really tore down a lot of the quote-unquote foundations that book had rested on, and you tore it down. And some people were just shocked because they said, well, wait, he said this. And you said, no, this is what happened. I remember I got a lot of response from that show. So go ahead, tell us why this stuff is important to know.
Well, Cicero, one of the great Roman statesmen, said to be ignorant of one's past is to perpetually remain a child. And one of the problems I see in America today is we are perhaps more childish than we've ever been. We only look at things that confirm our prejudices and our views, whatever they may be. We don't about or even entertain ideas that we disagree with. You know, if we see it's something negative about the guy we like, whoever that is, or the politician we like, or the actor we like, well, if it's negative, it must be false. I mean, you know, fake news. That's the order of the day. Yeah. The thing is, there's a lot of real fake news out there, and a lot of it is coming from sources that are highly partisan or highly biased towards one side or the other. History has a lot to teach us, but goodness sake, let's get real. Okay, yeah, I'm from the South, Parker. I'm a descendant of slave owners. But at the same time, I have done enough primary source research to know the Civil War really was about slavery. And yet, over half the people down here are still in denial about it. And if you confront them with actual hard historical evidence, say, go read the Texas Ordinance of Secession and see how many times it mentions slavery versus how many times it mentions states' rights. They won't do it because they don't want to have their view of things overturned. So I think having reflecting history accurately is so important. And I may make a few minor mistakes here and there. Honestly, the ones that I see in there, the average reader wouldn't catch. They still bug me that I wish I could go back and fix it for just a few little things here and there. But I try very hard to keep my historical background as accurate as possible.
You know, one thing that I noticed, like you said, I like the quote that you say, you know, to remain ignorant of one's past is perpetually remain a child. And that's important because a lot of the rhetoric nowadays is all about, I'm right, I feel right, I am. And if you were to show them concrete evidence of being wrong, people can't handle it. Like, not millennials per se, because not every millennial does that, but a lot of people, they can't handle it. They're like, no, you can show them concrete evidence. No, that this is the case, you know, and they can't handle it. Their brains will blow up or something. They can't handle it because we aren't taught to critically think. And history does allow us to critically think. You know, this is why lawyers spend so much time critically thinking, because they're always trying to come up with the best solution for whatever case they're looking at, or the best defense or the best offense, whatever, you know. And critical thinking is sorely lacking in our society today. That's why for myself, and you were there, Lewis, you know, when the election hit, and I'm not talking about that, but when the election hit, social media just blew up with so much hate and so much virulence, and I couldn't understand it. I was like, okay, so-and-so didn't win. All right. You know, I just couldn't understand why people turned into rabid, mad beasts almost. They just really got crazy about it. And I'm like, well, no, it doesn't change the fact that, you know, whoever won. And it's not just that, it's other things too. It's just this rabid downgrade of society where people aren't thinking. And if I want to feel good about how I feel, whether or not that feeling good is based in fact or based in truth. And I think understanding our history and doing how God is calling you, Lewis, to write these books on history, interweave with an entertaining tale, so people know, hey, learn your history, become an adult. Essentially become an adult.
I mean, that is the thing. When you truly study the history of the New Testament, you know, I'm huge on apologetics. The historical record supports the truth of the gospel far more than most skeptics are willing to admit. I have a friend that I enjoy debating from time to time on my Facebook page, but, you know, at one time he at least would acknowledge that Jesus was a real historical person. Now he's about made up his mind that Jesus never even existed. That flies in the face of all the historical evidence, and I'm not just talking about the Gospels. There's many historical references to Jesus outside the Gospels, and frankly, saying that the real Jesus never existed is just it's fantasy. It is self-delusion, and or saying that the Gospels are fairy tales. Well, you know, you look, there's so much historical fact in the Gospels, and generally, when something is accurate in the small things, then you can bank that it's probably going to be accurate in the large things as well. That's just, you know, that's why I look at Luke. You know, who was it? Sir William Ramsay, who was educated in the late 19th century at a time when scholars were taught to regard the New Testament with extreme skepticism. He became a classical archaeologist. He went over to the Middle East. He excavated sites in Judea, in Syria, in Italy. And at the end of 25 years of doing excavations, he made the determination that Luke was one of the greatest historians of antiquity. You know, he said Luke was more reliable than Herodotus, the father of history.
You know, I think that's important. And listen to another thing I want to talk to you about on your blog. And your blog has a lot of things on there. It's not just about your books. It's about the things you've done. I remember when you went to Israel and following that very vividly because I enjoyed getting those blogs when we went to Israel. And, you know, you got short fiction, all that kind of stuff. But one thing that you recently posted to your blog that I want to talk about in the few minutes that we have left, because it kind of ties it all together, is that you were responding to someone who's agnostic. And this person made quite a few comments that I encourage our listeners to go to your blog, and you can give them the blog address in a minute, was making lots of comments. One thing that agnostic person kept coming back was, how do we know any of this stuff is true? You know, how do we know that the history of everything that we say is history is true? You know, and you made comments to that. Can you kind of give us a brief overview? Because it really ties into our faith. It really ties into what we believe about the world around us. You know, that it makes sense to us because of the fact that we believe these things and other things. Go ahead and kind of bring it all together for us, Lewis.
Sure. And that was in response to something I put up on my Facebook page. And this young man came back with just a whole laundry list of questions just about things in general. Some of it was about, you know, the argument, well, if there is a God, why do stuff like hurricanes happen? Some of it was, how do you know any of it is true? And really, you know, if you go back before the age of photography, how do we know anything is true? Well, you go with the preponderance of historical evidence. Sorry, I mean, no one would question that Alexander the Great was a real historical person. No one. And yet, at the same time, if you look, the oldest complete biography we have of Alexander the Great was written from, I think I want to say, around 300 years after he died. Now, it drew supposedly on earlier documents, but the fact is, it's 300 years removed from his life. The earliest gospel, the Gospel of Mark, I think there's a very good chance Mark was complete in the 50s A.D. Jesus was crucified around 33. So if you think about that, that means that Mark was written less than 20 years after the events. Matthew and Luke probably shortly after that. Now, there's some hot dispute about the dating of the books of the New Testament, but at a minimum, even if they were written in 70 A.D., which is kind of the latter date given for Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you're still talking about within 40 years of the events they chronicle. Like I said, I can make a very strong argument that Matthew, Mark, and Luke were all complete by 62 A.D., less than 30 years after the crucifixion. All kinds of eyewitnesses still alive at that point. So the idea that this is just some fairy tale that somebody made up, okay, then if it's a fairy tale, why wasn't it rejected? You know, if Jesus never rose from the grave, why didn't, when the disciples started preaching in Jerusalem just weeks after his death, why did they not come out and say, oh, no, this is not true. He's still buried right over there. Look, here's the body. Things like that. You know, history isn't like science, okay? With science, it's repeatable and provable. You know, you can run the same experiment 100 times and get the same result if it's based on sound scientific truth. History is not like that. You go with the preponderance of evidence. Where does the evidence point, and what evidence do we have, and how close is it to the event? And I think the New Testament passes the test of history as well as any other document from the ancient world, and indeed better than most.
I was thinking about that book, and I cannot recall his name right now. He wrote a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict.
Josh McDowell.
Thank you. I knew it was something. And, he puts a lot of evidential apologetics in there, historical apologetics, stuff like that. And I was thinking of why this stuff is so important. It's because if you don't know the history, you really don't know your future. And,
right.
When we talk about, yeah, go ahead.
Peter says we should always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is within us.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's why, what I love how the Lord does things, especially since you told me about Rome, that just really scintillates me in all kind of ways. That just so scintillating to me right now. And it's like, the Lord knew that at this moment in time, it will reach the most people, and I just love that. That just totally just makes my head explode. It just makes my head explode with just wonder and more wonder, that obviously this message is so important that he wants as many people as possible to know about it, that he wants everyone to know about it, And I like that the Lord is using you, Lewis, using your love for history, using the pen to write these tales to tell that story. So I want to thank you for being with me on the show, but I want people to know where they can find you online. I know we mentioned your blog, so go ahead and give us that address.
All right. The blog, it's at blogspot.com, and it's called Lewis Literary Lair, which is kind of wordy, but the title I wanted was taken. So Lewis Literary Lair at blogspot.com. I've also got a Facebook page where I post all of my announcements, and that is author Lewis Ben Smith on Facebook.com. That's my author page. And I'm on Twitter, author Indy Smith. My nickname is Indiana Smith from way back. So author Indy Smith at Twitter.com. And my next book signing is in Denton, Texas at a lovely little store called Recycled Books. And that is going to be December the 9th from about 1 till 5 or 6 o'clock that evening. So hopefully maybe even meet a few listeners there.
The show is always about encouraging authors to pick up the pen and write. And you took your love of history, archaeology, and the truth, and you put it all into a book, in several books actually, and going forward for more. What I want you to do in the last few moments we have, I want you to encourage those authors out there whom God has given the gift to write to pick up the pen and do so.
Absolutely. One of my all-time favorite movies with Billy Crystal is called Throw Mama from the Train. And one of the things he says in there as a college writing instructor is, a writer writes always. So start writing. If it's not good, delete it and write something else. But you don't become a writer until you just start writing and keep writing. I started 2 novels that I never finished before I finally wrote the Testimonium. I wrote a bunch of short stories. Some of them were awful. Some of them were pretty good. But the thing is, I wrote. And so if you want to be a writer, sit down and start writing. You don't have to know how the story ends in order to begin it. As a matter of fact, I rarely know how mine are going to end. I just find that hole in the keyboard and crawl through and hop on the back of that story and let it take me where it wants to go.
Lewis, thank you so much for being with us on this show today. It is always a pleasure to have you. Can't wait to have you back real soon.
All right. It was a pleasure, Parker. I had a great time.
And we were talking today to Lewis Ben Smith. He is the author of the book Theophilus, A Tale of Ancient Rome. If you love historical fiction and in ancient world, go ahead and pick up a copy of Lewis's book today. You are not going to be disappointed. And make sure you browse through his website, lewisliterarylair.blogspot.com. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at author Indy Smith. One thing about Lewis that I always love is his passion to educate you about what's going on in the past and today. I follow him on Facebook. He's always so insightful about the events of the day, and I really admire him, and I admire his candidness, but as well as his love and his sincere hope that you be educated in your faith, that your faith can stand on firm foundation, that as Christians, we do not believe in fairy tales. We believe in the one true God who came down from heaven to save us from our sins, and that all of history records his great love toward us. Thank you so much for being me for this edition of The Right Stuff. I'm the queen of Tuesday nights, Parker J. You have a wonderful, absolutely glorious, blessed day. Thank you for joining us for this edition of The Right Stuff. Follow Parker online at parkerjcole.com. To hear this show and other shows, visit the show archive at therightstuffradio.wordpress.com. We'll be back same time next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Time.